Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is an image. In this case, this is an image I took with my phone of a reprint of X-Mail, which is just a reader's mail column from. In this case, this is reader reaction mail from X-Men or Uncanny X-Men, I should say, 137. And what I wanted to do was kind of read this reply by Chris Claremont to the readers. And it goes like this. John Byrne and I knew we were doing something special the moment we planned the Dark Phoenix storyline more months ago than either of us cared to think about. How special we didn't realize until we started getting your reactions to it. At this writing, we've already received more letters than for any other issue, and they're still pouring in. And those letters are among the most emotional and heartfelt I've ever read. Some are pro, some are con. All were written by people who passionately care about the X-Men and the characters in it. Extraordinary is a pale description. To say we're grateful for the response, even the negative response, would be a grievous understatement. That's why we're skipping commentary on all the issues prior to 137 to devote this letter column and another in this summer's X-Men annual to as many letters about Fate of the Phoenix as we can print. However, whether or not your particular letter sees print, it will have been read by me and John. To all of you, to all who helped make the X-Men the success it is, our deepest thanks and appreciation, Chris Claremont, July 1980. And we got a couple letters right here that I managed to fit in the image from two people who aren't crazy that lived in California back in the 80s. Dear Chris and John, greater love hath no X-Men. Thank you. Dennis from San Diego, California. To those concerned, it's been a long time since a comic book has made me cry. Thank you for X-Men 137. Terry from Fullerton, California. So, very interesting, right? By the way, the next letter in this X column is someone who basically says, I hate you. So they get two little puff pieces right here, and then the next one is someone who's a real Jean Grey fan who's not very happy. So to give some background on this letter, X-Men 137 is the conclusion of the Dark Phoenix saga. Has a very controversial ending. Jean Grey dies. She was one of the founding members of the X-Men, Marvel Girl, written by Stan Lee. It was a rough ending to the character because the character had become the Phoenix and had become one of the most powerful mutants out there, right? At the peak of it all, but it came with a price, and the price was their own, Jean Grey's own ability to control herself, her own sanity. Right, with the Phoenix, being her inner demon that she's constantly fighting to control over, and it's also, a dramatic end of the storyline for the characters that love Jean Grey, like Cyclops, right, to realize and understand that she had to die in that situation, and the fallout to the X-Men was also dramatic, right? The X-Men team changed very greatly after the Dark Phoenix saga. Cyclops left. Storm took up a leadership role for the Uncanny X-Men. And the issues that followed after the Dark Phoenix saga were pretty amazing because you had, a great team up of Alpha Flight. You had the introduction of Kitty Pryde to the team. And you also had the, legendary Days of Future Past comic or storyline that occurred after this, which I think is like the last John Byrne Uncanny X-Men's that he drew before moving on to Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight full time. So what is the purpose of this video, right? So what struck me and why I wanted to make a video of this particular image, right, a response, is it highlights the professionalism and where Marvel Comics was back in the 1980s when they were at their best. What is easily, seen in this response by Chris Claremont is how much he cares about the X-Men and how much it strikes him, the responses from the readers, and how appreciative of it he is of it, because he can see that the readers care about the X-Men too. One of the things about Chris Claremont, right, and obviously I'm a Chris Claremont fan. Sometimes I probably praise him a little too much, honestly, but because he does have his bad points. As I kind of mentioned in the Magic series, or the Magic mini series, he gets really wordy sometimes and a little too thick, like just a little too much dialogue and maybe just a little bit too much narration boxes, right? But he and also he's had like some of his more modern stuff like Extreme X-Men, not so great at all. I think it's commonly understood that Chris Claremont worked best when he was with good editorial. So when he worked with Louise Simonson, Ann Nesenti, Jim Shooter, people who took their job seriously, right? He produced his best stuff, and he was very focused as a writer. Not so much in the later days with, say, like Bob Harris or some of the later editors at Marvel, right? But despite that, one thing you can't really bag Chris Claremont on is how much he cared about the X-Men. There's one guy who really, truly does care about the characters, the X-Men. It's and the associated characters too, from Excalibur, New Mutants, X Factor. It's Chris Claremont. And you can see it in like interviews when he's talking about it. He calls Colossus Peter. He calls Storm Aurora. He calls Wolverine Logan, right? And they're almost like real people to him. And he was always passionate about these characters, always respectful of them. And ultimately, he was a professional, right? I don't agree with everything Chris Claremont, believes in, but I do respect him for being such a professional writer, and you can see it in this response. He's not trashing on the negative responses to Dark Phoenix. He realizes that readers care about that character, so the death of that character obviously is going to elicit, a strong response, and he's appreciative of all those responses, and he's taken them in stride, and he is going to devote many letter columns. And even the X-Men annual letter column just to this issue because of how many people cared about that ending to the Dark Phoenix saga. Now, compare and contrast with like today's modern Marvel, right? I was reading I think it was Absolute Carnage, and it had like a letter column just like this, which I thought was fascinating because you don't really see a lot of letter columns in modern Marvel comics. Unless it's what they do right here in this Absolute Carnage comic that I was reading. They clearly cherry picked the letters or the responses or the emails to find people, that were very, very, just all pro, all praise, everybody worshiping at the altar of Donny Cates. Right. And that's usually what you see in these modern letter comics. You never see the negative. You just see the positive. The only place you're going to really see the negative is online, on message forums that, don't ban people, or on YouTube in the case of like your boy Zach and many others, or on Twitter when, these guys don't, chain block everybody in the universe. Right. And, there's been videos of Donny Cates and his replies to, people giving him criticism on Twitter, even like very, nice and constructive criticism on things he could do better, right? His response is always very dismissive and unprofessional. He's pretty much like, nah, bro, I'm good. Which is hilarious because, I've read, Venom and Absolute Carnage. And while I actually personally like it more than that Jonathan Hickman shit that is currently out, I wouldn't say he's like great. I'd say he's okay. And he's definitely a lot better when he's not, spending too much time on Twitter or freaking raging on stupid shit all the time. But it just goes to show you that's like, Donny Cates is about as professional as it gets at Marvel Comics. For everyone else, it's actually like much, much worse, right? It's been getting a little better, but honestly, it was bad for a while. And no one is at the level of what the masters like Chris Claremont or Frank Miller. You probably saw the thumbnail for this video. It's actually a old photo of Chris Claremont and Frank Miller at a convention. I don't know if it was a convention in Europe or South America or something like that. It's kind of interesting to see them that young. I thought it would be a kind of a blast from the past kind of thing to use as a thumbnail. But yeah, man, it's reading these mail columns, reprinted mail columns from the past. Not only is it like a snap, a photo or a look into, the Marvel comics of this era and how incredibly different they are compared to what it is today. I mean, interesting enough, like Marvel Comics was owned by a company called Cadence, and a lot of people don't realize this. Cadence is like not even remotely involved with like the print industry anymore. Cadence is actually known for like making software for engineers nowadays, which is pretty interesting. That was the company that owned Marvel Comics back in the day. And Yeah, man, it's crazy reading this, and it's also kind of depressing and almost gut wrenching because you could see the passion, you could see the love and the emotion from everyone involved, both the writers, the artists, the readers, editorial. People cared about these characters, and this isn't just an X-Men thing too. People cared about Spider-Man. People cared about Superman action comics, Batman Detective Comics, the Teen Titans, all that stuff. People cared about comics. And when you look at it today, the passion it's kind of dead for a lot of these people. It's just, it's just a job. It's just a day job. Yeah, whatever, Yeah. The X-Men. Yeah. They're on an island now, and yeah, they're racist and segregationist, and now villains, and they sell drugs to human power. fucking House of X. When you compare it to this stuff right here. Yeah, I didn't want to go and rant on too long. I try to keep my videos, in a reasonable timeline. If I hit like 12 minutes, I'm like, oh shit, this is way too long. I gotta speed it up. But anyhow, that's it. If you like the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you've been watching these videos and been thinking about subscribing, go ahead and subscribe. You'll have a lot of fun. And if you do subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And I will see you next time.